I was standing at my desk signing off on 3 contractor invoices when my phone buzzed. And for one full second, everything in my life felt exactly right. The office was quiet, the way it only gets after 5. The cleaning crew hadn't come through yet. The Tyndall commercial sign on the glass partition behind me caught the last of the Atlanta afternoon light, and I remember thinking my father would have loved seeing it look like that. Gold and solid, and exactly what he built it to be. I set the pen down, smoothed the front of my dress. Tonight was 4 years. My name is Nettie Tyndall. I run operations for my father's commercial contracting company. Contracts, vendors, site scheduling. The parts of the business that don't get celebrated but don't survive without someone holding them together. My father, Linwood Tyndall, built this company before I was old enough to understand what he was doing. By the time I did understand, I had already decided I wasn't going anywhere else. I picked up my purse, turned off my desk lamp, and that's when Garfield called. "Hey, baby." His voice was warm, easy, the kind of easy that never made me suspicious because it was just how he sounded, like a man with nothing to hide. "Listen, I know tonight's our night. I haven't forgotten. But Mildred just pulled me into something urgent. Client issue, last minute. I'm so sorry." I leaned against the desk. "How long?" "Hour, maybe less. I'll make it up to you, I promise." There was noise behind him, voices, the particular hum of somewhere busy. I didn't think twice about it. "Okay," I said. "Don't be too late." He hung up and I stood there for a moment, not hurt, not worried, just recalibrating. 4 years of marriage teaches you which disappointments to hold and which ones to set down. This felt like the kind you set down. I was reaching for my keys when Mildred called. Mildred Hollowell had been Garfield's employer for 3 years and had become something close to a friend to me. The kind of friendship that forms between professional women in Atlanta when they find each other trustworthy. She was warm, straightforward, and never wasted my time. "Nettie, I know it's your anniversary evening and I won't keep you long." Her voice carried that particular calm she always had, unhurried, certain. "I have something for you, a small gift. I'm already at Haven. You know the one on Piedmont. 20 minutes, that's all I need." I smiled. "Mildred, you didn't have to do that. I wanted to. Come on, 20 minutes. I thought about Garfield's call, his urgent meeting with his boss. And here was his boss, already at a restaurant, relaxed enough to be giving out anniversary gifts. Something warm moved through my chest. The kind of warmth that comes when you realize the people around you have been quietly coordinating. When you understand, without anyone saying so, that the evening isn't ruined at all, that it was never going to be. Before you keep watching, what time is it where you are right now? Drop it in the comments. I always love knowing who's up with me. I touched up my lip color in the car mirror. I drove the 12 minutes to Piedmont without music, just the city moving around me. The evening settling into that particular Atlanta blue that happens just before full dark. I found parking half a block from Haven. Walked the short distance to the entrance. The restaurant glowed from inside. Warm light, dress tables, the soft register of a Friday evening filling up. I reached for the door handle. I had absolutely no idea. Mildred was already standing when I walked in. She waved me toward her table, table 9, left side of the room, partially behind a partition that gave it privacy without isolation. I smiled, crossing the floor. The restaurant was full, dressed, humming. I set my purse down and was pulling out my chair when something at the far end of the room made me stop. Not a sound, not a movement, just a shape that was too familiar to ignore. A man's profile, the particular way his shoulders sat, Slightly forward, always slightly forward. The way I had watched across 100 dinners. My eyes moved to the woman beside him before my mind had finished confirming who he was. She was turned toward him. Her hand rested near his on the table. And then he leaned across, slow, deliberate, the way a man moves when he is completely certain no one who matters is watching. And kissed her. My stepmother's face tilted up to receive it. I was on my feet before I understood I had stood. Mildred's hand closed around my arm. Firm, immediate, like she had been waiting for exactly this moment. Sit down. Her voice was barely above a breath. That was just a tip. I looked at her. Her eyes were steady, not surprised, not apologetic. Steady the way someone's eyes get when they have been carrying something heavy and have finally set it down in front of you. I sat. The restaurant kept moving. A server passed with a tray. Someone laughed 2 tables over. The music didn't stop. Nothing in that room acknowledged that my marriage and something I couldn't yet name had just ended in the same breath. I picked up my water glass, set it back down without drinking. Garfield hadn't seen me. Florette hadn't seen me. They were deep in whatever world they had built at that corner table, close, comfortable, unhurried. The kind of comfortable that doesn't happen in a single evening. 4 minutes passed. I know because I watched the clock above the bar without meaning to. Then, the door opened. A woman walked in, mid-30s, heels, moving with the specific energy of someone who knows exactly where she's going and has every right to go there. She crossed the restaurant floor without hesitation, and I watched her eyes find Garfield's table the same way mine had. Recognition without surprise, purpose without performance. She stopped at his table. I was too far to hear, but I didn't need to hear. Garfield's body changed first. That forward lean pulling back, shoulders squaring, the posture of a man suddenly managing 2 directions at once. The woman's hands moved when she spoke, short, sharp gestures. Florette turned, and I watched her face go through something I had never seen on it before. Not embarrassment, not guilt. Something older than that. The particular expression of a woman who has just learned she is not the one being deceived, but is standing in the evidence of someone else's recklessness. The woman's voice rose enough that the 2 nearest tables went quiet. A manager appeared from somewhere to the left. Garfield's hands came up, the universal gesture of a man trying to lower a temperature he created. I watched all of it. I did not move. I did not speak. I did not look away. For a brief moment, the woman pointed toward him with an open hand, not dramatic, not theatrical, just exhausted. The gesture of someone discovering she had been standing inside a lie. Then the manager guided her toward the front of the restaurant. The noise folded back into the general hum of the room. I picked up my water glass, took 1 slow sip, and set it back down on the table. Mildred was watching me. I kept my eyes on the corner table. I changed out of my dress before he got home. Not because I wanted to pretend the evening hadn't happened, because I needed him to walk into a room that gave him nothing, no evidence of where I had been, no mascara, no restaurant smell, no anniversary energy left on my skin. I put on a house dress, made a cup of tea I didn't drink, and sat at the kitchen table under the overhead light. I wasn't angry. That surprised me. Anger would have meant I still believed the version of him I had married. What I felt instead was quieter than anger and much more permanent. His key hit the lock at 9:43. He came in carrying the particular looseness of a man who has rehearsed his entrance. Jacket over one arm. Tie loosened just enough. The expression already arranged, tired but present, apologetic but not groveling. "Hey, baby." He set his keys on the counter. "Meeting ran longer than I thought." "You eat?" I had something. I said. He opened the refrigerator, stood there a moment, closed it. I really am sorry about tonight. Next weekend. Wherever you want, I mean it. I looked at him the way you look at something you are memorizing. It's fine, Garfield. He talked for another few minutes. Something about the client, something about Mildred, something about traffic on Piedmont. I heard every word and stored none of it. I just watched his mouth move and thought about how long a person can perform in front of someone who is no longer watching the performance. We went to bed before 11. In the dark, he reached for me, one hand at my waist, familiar and unhurried. I didn't pull away. I didn't move toward him. I lay, completely, still, and let him read that stillness as sleep or tiredness, or the ordinary distance of a missed anniversary evening. He settled. His breathing slowed within minutes. I stared at the ceiling until 3. I called Mildred from my car the next morning, parked 2 blocks from the office with the engine running. She picked up on the second ring. I need to understand what last night was, I said. She didn't hesitate. 6 months ago, I started noticing gaps in Garfield's schedule. Unexplained blocks, a name that kept appearing, calendar entries that didn't match anything on the company side. I started documenting it the way I document anything in HR that doesn't add up. A pause. 3 weeks ago, a restaurant charge came through on a company card he shouldn't have been using. Haven, on a Tuesday. I pulled the record, looked at the dates. Then I called you. You didn't know what I'd find. I suspected. I didn't know. The woman who came in, I said. Denise. A colleague. She's been in a private relationship with him, or believed she was. No connection to anything else. She found out about the restaurant the same way women find out about things they weren't supposed to know. Mildred's voice was even. She's not part of anything larger, Nettie. She's just another person he lied to. I let that sit for a moment. Another woman who thought she was the only one. Another woman who walked into a room carrying certainty and left carrying something she couldn't name yet. I understood that feeling now in a way I hadn't 12 hours ago. How much do you want to know? Mildred asked. The question was careful. It was giving me a door I could choose not to open. Everything, I said. She began. Patterns, dates, documentation, the slow accumulation of a picture she had built one careful detail at a time. Her voice stayed level throughout. Professional, like a woman who had been waiting to hand this to the right person. She stopped after several minutes. There's a folder, she said. When you're ready. Mildred chose a coffee shop on the west side of Atlanta, the kind of place where the tables are far enough apart that a conversation stays a conversation. She was already seated when I arrived. No laptop, no phone on the table. Just a plain manila folder set face down in front of her, like something that needed to be handled carefully. I sat. She didn't open it immediately. She looked at me first, the way a doctor looks before delivering results, measuring whether you are ready or only think you are. Take your time with each page, she said. Don't move to the next one until you've finished the one you're holding. She slid the folder across. The first pages were dates, 8 months of them. Tuesday evenings, almost without exception. Haven restaurant appearing often enough that the pattern eventually became impossible to ignore. I looked up. Where did this come from? Mildred folded her hands. 3 months ago, an anonymous concern landed in HR. Nothing formal. No allegation I could act on. Just enough information to make me pay attention. She paused. Then, accounting flagged several company card charges that didn't match the calendar entries attached to them. Not enough for discipline, just enough for a routine compliance review. I looked back at the pages. The photographs came next. Garfield and a woman I didn't recognize. Not Florette, someone else entirely, at the same corner table across multiple dates. Then Florette. 2 photographs, taken from a distance, both at Haven, both on Tuesdays. I turned each page the way she told me, slowly, completely. 2 women before the anniversary. A third, Denise, who arrived at the end. A man who had been moving through the same routine long enough to believe it was invisible. I set the last photograph down. He used my name to get into rooms, I said. It wasn't a question. It had landed while I was looking at the pictures, the slow recognition of how Garfield moved through Atlanta's business circles. He had no company behind him, no title, no equity. What he had was me, my father's name, the doors that opened because of what Tyndall Commercial meant in this city. Yes, Mildred said. He made introductions, past contacts, built goodwill using access that came from your marriage. No formal arrangement with your company. But the rooms he got into were yours. She reached across and turned to the last page, in the folder. It was a vendor intake document, the kind Tyndall Commercial uses when onboarding a new contractor referral. I recognized our internal format immediately. The vendor came up during a routine review, Mildred said. That's why I looked closer. The vendor had been introduced through Garfield 14 months ago. The account showed a referral payment moving through an outside account I didn't recognize. Not a Tyndall account, something external. I would have moved past it, except for the line near the bottom. Reference contact, F. Calloway. I read it twice. Florette's professional name, her contact number, listed as the reference source on a vendor Garfield introduced. I looked up at Mildred. She's his stepmother-in-law. Yes. She has no business relationship with that vendor. None that I could find. I looked back at the page. The referral payment wasn't large. That wasn't what bothered me. It was that the vendor had paid it at all. A consulting fee, a placement fee, the kind of payment businesses sometimes make for introductions that lead to contracts. Nothing illegal by itself. But the money had moved through neither Garfield's employer nor Tyndall Commercial. It moved somewhere else. The coffee shop moved around us, someone ordering at the counter, a chair scraping, the ordinary sounds of a Tuesday morning that had nothing to do with what was sitting on the table between us. I looked back at the document. Florette's name in plain type, small, unremarkable to anyone who didn't know what it was sitting next to. What does it mean? I didn't ask because I expected an answer. I asked because I needed to hear the shape of the question out loud. Mildred shook her head. I don't know what it means. A pause. But I know it doesn't belong there. I closed the folder, slid it back across the table, stood, picked up my keys, and walked to my car. I drove home with both hands on the wheel and didn't turn the radio on once. I was at my desk by 7:15 the next morning. Not because the office opened at 7:15, because I needed to be inside those files before anyone else arrived, before the phones started, before the administrative staff filtered in, before the day became a day, and I had to perform being fine in front of people who had no reason to think I wasn't. I pulled 3 years of vendor contract files, systematically, starting from the oldest and moving forward, the way you work when you are looking for something you don't yet have a name for. Garfield's introductions were easy to identify. He had a particular way of framing them when he passed names to me. Always casual. Always positioned as something he'd picked up through conversation, never as anything deliberate. I had accepted that framing every time because it fit the version of him I believed in. The first overlap took me 40 minutes to find. A structural engineering firm, Garfield, introduced in the spring of 2 years ago. A name he brought to me over dinner one evening like something he'd heard at a networking event. I found the intake file, pulled back further, and located a note in Linwood's correspondence from 4 months prior. Florette had mentioned that same firm to him at a family dinner. She had framed it as something she'd read about. Linwood had noted the name in his personal planner, the small leather one he keeps on his desk, and done nothing with it. Then Garfield delivered them, and Linwood attributed the relationship entirely to his son-in-law. I sat with that for a moment. Then I kept pulling. The second overlap wasn't as clean. A commercial supply vendor Garfield later introduced appeared in a set of notes from a dinner conversation months earlier. The name was there. So was Florette. But what caught my attention wasn't the name itself. It was timing. The vendor appeared in Florette's conversation in February. Garfield introduced them in April. Close enough to notice. Far enough apart to be forgotten. I marked it and moved on. The third overlap was stronger than I expected. A subcontractor Garfield brought to us for a municipal bid had attended a charity fundraiser Florette helped organize the year before. The contractor's name appeared in guest correspondence attached to event records she had kept for tax documentation. I stared at that one longer, not because it proved anything, because it was the third time I had watched a name move through her orbit before eventually arriving through Garfield. The fourth possibility was thinner. A property management consultant Garfield eventually brought into a discussion about strategic partnerships. Months before that, Florette had mentioned the same consultant during a Sunday dinner conversation about Atlanta commercial development. No recommendation, no push. Just the name passing through the room. By itself, it meant nothing. What bothered me was seeing it again. I leaned back in my chair. One confirmed overlap. Two suspicious overlaps. One coincidence that no longer felt entirely coincidental. Individually, each one was explainable. Atlanta's business community overlaps constantly. People hear the same names, attend the same events, read the same trade publications. But the pattern had started to bother me. Not because I could prove anything, because I couldn't stop seeing the same relay. A name surfaced around Florette. Months passed. Garfield arrived carrying that same name. Linwood credited Garfield. Garfield gained standing. Florette gained influence. Nobody questioned the sequence because the sequence was spread across years. I documented what I found in a separate personal file I saved to a drive I kept at home. Nothing on the company server, nothing that could be accessed without my knowledge. I moved nothing, flagged nothing inside the system. The files stayed exactly as I found them. I wasn't building conclusions. I was preserving observations. I was closing the last drawer when I heard my father's voice in the hallway. He appeared in my doorway looking better than he had in months. Color in his face, jacket pressed, the particular energy he carries when he's had a good morning. "You're in early." "Catching up," I said. He leaned against the door frame. "Florette wants to have Henderson over for dinner. Estate paperwork. She thinks it'll be easier to go through everything in a comfortable setting rather than his office." He smiled. "You know how she is. Always trying to make things easier. Henderson was our family's estate attorney." "That sounds nice," I said. He nodded, said something about lunch later in the week, and moved back down the hallway. I waited until his footsteps reached the far end of the corridor. Then I picked up my pen and wrote Henderson's name on the page in front of me. I closed the file drawer carefully, the kind of careful that makes no sound at all. I gave myself one evening to go back, not to grieve it, to map it. There is a difference, and by that point, I understood exactly which one I needed. I sat at the kitchen table after Garfield went to sleep, and I laid the courtship out in my mind the way I had laid those vendor files across my desk, methodically, without sentiment, looking for the architecture underneath the feeling. Florette introduced us at a dinner party she hosted at my father's house 2 years before the wedding. I had thought nothing of it at the time. She entertained regularly, Small gatherings, well-chosen guests. The kind of evenings that felt effortless because someone had worked very hard to make them feel that way. Garfield was there as a friend of a colleague, she said. Someone she thought I might enjoy meeting. I enjoyed meeting him. That part was real. Whatever Garfield is, he is good at being met. What I understood now, sitting at that table, was that Florette had built the guest list around one introduction. Everything else at that dinner, the food, the other guests, the easy conversation, was framing. I was the subject of an evening I thought I was simply attending. The encounters that followed felt different when I looked back on them. A gallery opening where Garfield appeared and found me near the back. A business breakfast where he happened to be seated 2 tables away. A Saturday afternoon at Ponce City Market where we ran into each other and walked for an hour. I turned each one over carefully. The gallery opening bothered me most. Florette had mentioned it to me the week before and asked if I was going. I said yes. She said she might stop by. She never did. Garfield did. The business breakfast was harder to read. Florette had forwarded the event to me by email with a note that it might be worth attending. Garfield was already registered. That proved nothing by itself. Atlanta's business community is smaller than people think. The Ponce City Market encounter was harder still. I had told Florette I was going that Saturday morning. She was the only person I remembered mentioning it to. But memory is an imperfect witness. Maybe I told someone else. Maybe Garfield really was there by chance. I couldn't prove it. That mattered. Because I wasn't trying to build a story. I was trying to understand one. What I knew for certain was enough. The introduction wasn't chance. The gallery almost certainly wasn't chance. And once a person has arranged 2 meetings, you start looking differently at the third. I thought about Florette's role in the months that followed, the texture of it, the consistency. She never pushed. That was the craft of it. A well-placed comment to Linwood about how grounded Garfield seemed. A quiet remark to me once, over coffee, that a steady man was rare and worth recognizing when he showed up. Small inputs, delivered naturally, spaced far enough apart that none of them felt like pressure. Linwood had loved Garfield within 6 months. Not because Garfield was exceptional, because Florette had been quietly framing him as exceptional long before Linwood formed his own opinion. Then, the proposal. Garfield chose a rooftop in Midtown, a restaurant bar with a view I had mentioned to Florette weeks earlier during a salon appointment. I remembered saying it was one of the most romantic places in Atlanta. 6 weeks later, Garfield proposed there. Maybe she told him, maybe he asked, maybe it was coincidence. At that point, I no longer cared which explanation was true. The pattern was already large enough without it. I sat at the kitchen table and looked at the full shape of it. 6 years of my life. The courtship, the engagement, the 4 years of marriage, touched by influences I never saw while they were happening. I didn't feel foolish. Foolish is what you feel when you miss something you should have caught. This was different. This was the feeling of realizing that someone had been quietly guiding the current while convincing everyone the river was moving on its own. I didn't fall in love. I chose Garfield. But for the first time, I had to ask myself how much help that choice received from the woman standing behind it. I started going to my father's house 3 evenings a week. Nothing dramatic about it. I framed it as checking in, bringing food sometimes, staying for dinner, helping with small things around the house the way a daughter does when her father has had a health scare, and she wants to be present without making it feel like presence. Linwood accepted it the way he accepts most things I do, warmly, without question, because between us there has never needed to be a reason beyond wanting to be in the same room. Florette accepted it the same way. That was the first thing I noted. She didn't adjust her behavior when I arrived, didn't tighten, didn't perform, didn't reroute anything she was doing. She moved through that house with the ease of a woman who had nothing to hide, or the discipline of one who had hidden everything so completely that ease was no longer an effort. I watched her without watching her. That is a skill you develop when you already know what you're looking for and simply need to confirm its shape. She managed Linwood's calendar from a tablet she kept on the kitchen counter, appointments, medication reminders, contractor calls she fielded on his behalf when he was resting. It looked like devotion. From a certain angle, it was indistinguishable from it. But devotion and administration are different things, and what Florette practiced had the texture of the second, precise, consistent, and quietly total. His correspondence passed through her hands before it reached him. Not all of it. Enough of it. I noticed Henderson's name on the calendar during my second week of visits. A Thursday afternoon appointment, entered by Florette in the shared household calendar I could see from my own phone, because Linwood had added me to it years ago. I said nothing. 2 weeks later, a second Henderson appointment appeared. Same pattern, entered by Florette, no note attached, no mention to me at any point, before or after. I waited another 4 days before I said anything to Linwood. We were on the back porch after dinner, the kind of easy evening that requires nothing from either of us. I asked him, without looking up from my glass, how the estate paperwork was coming along. Florette's handling. Most of it, he said. Scheduling the meetings, organizing the documents, takes the load off me while I'm still getting my strength back. He said it the way people say things they find straightforward. Henderson's good people. We'll get it sorted. That's good, I said. She's thorough. He smiled. Always has been. I let the conversation move to something else and didn't return to it. The following morning, I called Henderson's office from my car. I identified myself as Linwood Tyndall's daughter, gave my full name, and asked to be included in any upcoming meetings regarding my father's estate planning. The assistant was polite, professional. She put me on a brief hold. When she came back, her voice had the careful quality of someone delivering a message they didn't write. Mrs. Calloway Ward had asked that those meetings remain between herself and Mr. Tyndall for the time being. She mentioned that Mr. Tyndall preferred to keep the process contained while he's still in recovery. I kept my voice even. I understand. Thank you. I ended the call. Florette had given instructions to an estate attorney's office on my father's behalf. She had given those instructions specifically about his daughter, and she had used his recovery as the reason. I set the phone down on the passenger seat. Garfield had been the first layer. The restaurant, the other women, the referral scheme. That was the surface. What was sitting underneath it, moving quietly through my father's house and his calendar and his attorney's office, was something else entirely. This was no longer about my marriage. I stayed at the office until everyone else had gone. The building went quiet around 7. I heard the last car leave the parking lot, waited another 10 minutes, then opened the investigative file Henderson's office had delivered that afternoon and laid the documents across my desk in sequence. The title history came first. The parcel had been in the Pruitt name since 1961, 32 years of continuous association with one family before the title gap surfaced, and the county process moved it. The gap itself was not unusual for that era. Heirs' property passed down through Black Southern families the way most things passed, through trust, through word, through the assumption that possession meant ownership. The paperwork didn't always follow. And when it didn't, the land was vulnerable to anyone who knew how to read a title search. Linwood's attorney in 1993 had known exactly how to read one. The acquisition was clean by every legal standard. Fair market value paid, county process followed, transfer recorded correctly. My father had done nothing that any competent contractor with a good attorney wouldn't have done. I needed to be clear about that before I went further, because what I was building had to be accurate, not emotional. The next section contained supporting records Henderson's investigator had assembled. Clarence Pruitt's death certificate, a county filing history, archived correspondence connected to the title dispute, a newspaper clipping from 1994. I worked through them one at a time. Clarence Pruitt died in April 1997, 3 years and 4 months after the acquisition. Cause listed as cardiac arrest. He was 61 years old, the same age my father is now. I sat with that for a moment. The newspaper item occupied less than a full column in a digitized neighborhood publication. No byline. One paragraph describing the displacement of a South Side family following redevelopment of a parcel they had occupied for generations. The title transfer had been contested. The county had ruled for the acquiring party. The family had relocated. One paragraph. Then nothing. The birth record came later in the file. Florette Anita Pruitt. The same surname Mildred had circled on her legal pad. Her childhood address appeared in documents connected to the original dispute. She was 24 years old when the transfer completed. 24 when her family lost the land. 27 when her father died. I built the timeline slowly, cross-referencing each document against the next. The land transfer in 1993. Her father's death in 1997. The years that followed, mostly absent from formal records, the way years spent rebuilding a life often are. The brief marriage to a man named Calloway. The surname she kept. The gradual re-entry into Atlanta's professional circles. And then, years later, somewhere, inside a room she had worked hard to access, the name Linwood Tyndall. I understood what might have happened in that moment. Not because I could prove it, because I could recognize the weight of it. A wound carried long enough stops feeling like pain and starts feeling like direction. When the name connected to your family's loss appears unexpectedly in your path, the wound doesn't simply reopen. It begins organizing itself around a target. This was not a plan Florette was born with. It was a direction she found. That distinction mattered. The woman I was looking at now was not someone who spent 30 years plotting revenge. She was someone who spent 30 years carrying a story she never escaped. Somewhere along the way, that story crossed paths with my father's. I sat at my desk for a long time after the last document was closed. I didn't hate her. That was the part that surprised me. I had expected to find hatred waiting at the end of this, and instead I found something quieter and much harder to carry. I understood the loss. I understood the years. I understood how a person could mistake reclaiming something for correcting it. Understanding her didn't change anything. It just made what I had to do feel heavier. I turned off my desk lamp. She didn't come for my husband. She came for my father. Garfield was just the door. I called Linwood on a Thursday morning and asked if he could stop by the office before lunch. Nothing in my voice that would register as urgent. Nothing that would make him mention it to Florette before he left the house. Just his daughter. Asking him to come by the place they had both built, the way she had done 100 times before. He arrived at 10:15 carrying 2 coffees from the place on Cascade he knows I prefer. He set one on my desk, settled into the chair across from me, and looked at me with the particular attention he reserves for moments when he suspects I have something real to say. I closed the office door. I had spent 2 days deciding how to order it. Not what to say. I knew what to say. The order mattered because Linwood is a man who builds his understanding the way he builds everything else. Foundation first, then structure, then the thing that has to carry weight at the top. Give him the roof before the walls, and he won't trust the building. I started with Garfield, I told him about the restaurant, about what I saw and what I didn't do when I saw it, about Mildred's documentation, the 8 months, the pattern, the Tuesday evenings, about the referral scheme, the vendor intake document, the referral fee running through an external account. I laid each piece down and waited for him to absorb it before I moved to the next one. He didn't interrupt, didn't shift in his chair, didn't make the sounds people make when they're processing something difficult. No exhaled breath, no slow head shake, no muttered reaction. He just listened with his hands wrapped around his coffee cup and his eyes steady on mine. When I moved to Florette, I slowed down further. I told him about the professional gap, the Callaway marriage and what it covered. The background Mildred's contact surfaced, and then I placed the copy of the 1993 Sylvan Road acquisition record on the desk between us, the one with Clarence Pruitt's name on the prior ownership line and Tyndall Commercial's name on the acquiring party line. I told him about Clarence Pruitt, the displacement, the 1994 newspaper item, the death record from 1997. Florette Anita Pruitt, 24 years old when the land transferred, 27 when her father died. I told him about the estate attorney appointments Florette had scheduled without mentioning them to me, about the instructions she had given Henderson's office, about the standing request that those meetings remain between herself and Linwood, and that his daughter be excluded. I set the last document down. The office was very quiet. Linwood looked at the papers on the desk for a long time, not reading them again. He had read everything as I placed it. He was doing something else, something internal that I recognized because I had watched him do it my entire life. The process of a man who refuses to respond to the shape of a thing until he is certain he has seen all of it. The silence lasted long enough that the building's air system cycled on and off. Then he looked up at me. "She been in my house 7 years?" His voice was level, not quiet with suppressed emotion, quiet with something that had already passed through emotion and come out the other side. "Yes, sir," I said. He nodded once, looked back at the desk. The second silence was different from the first. The first had been processing. This one was decided. "Get me Henderson." That was all. He reached into his jacket pocket, took out his phone, and set it on the desk in front of him. His hands were completely steady, the hands of a man who had spent 40 years building things that required him to be steady when the conditions around him were not. I watched him pick up the phone. Henderson's office was on the 14th floor of a building on Peachtree, the kind of office that communicates, without announcing it, that the person behind the desk has spent decades being trusted with things that matter. He was already seated when Mildred and I arrived. Linwood had called him 2 days prior. Whatever that conversation contained, Henderson had come prepared. A legal pad, a pen, and the particular stillness of a man who has heard difficult things for long enough that difficulty no longer unsettles him. Linwood was not in the room. That had been his instruction. He wanted the architecture built without him present so that nothing about the meeting could later be characterized as the emotional reaction of a grieving husband. His absence was itself a strategy. I laid everything on Henderson's desk in the same order I had laid it before Linwood. Garfield first, then Florette, then the documents. Mildred added her folder. Henderson read without interrupting, the way serious people read when the material requires it. When he finished, he set his pen down and looked at us. 2 tracks, he said, simultaneously. He turned the legal pad toward us. 2 columns, clean and parallel. The first track was the divorce. Georgia law allows fraud-based arguments in divorce proceedings under the right circumstances, and what Mildred's documentation established was a pattern of deliberate deception that predated the marriage itself. The referral scheme, the financial activity running through Tyndall's vendor records, and the evidence surrounding the courtship all became relevant context. "He'll try," Henderson said. "4 years of marriage, he'll believe he has standing. Most people would. The documentation changes the conversation." The second track was civil, not filing, preparation, evidence preservation, investigation. He tapped the second column. "What you have today is suspicion supported by documentation," he said. "That's useful. It's not the same thing as a lawsuit." I appreciated him more for saying it. The allegations themselves were serious. Estate-related interference, potential conspiracy, potential fraud-based claims tied to the marriage itself. Potential. The word appeared repeatedly in Henderson's notes. He addressed the marriage claim directly, the way a man does when he wants you to understand the difference between a strong argument and a guaranteed outcome. "Fraudulent inducement of marriage is harder," he said. "It requires establishing that you would not have married him had you known the full picture. That's a higher bar than conspiracy. It's personal. It's subjective. Opposing counsel will challenge it from every direction." He paused. "That doesn't mean it lacks value." I waited. "It helps establish motive. It helps establish intent. And if discovery supports what we believe happened, it becomes part of a larger story that a court can understand." "Put it on the board," I said. He nodded and wrote. The estate-related concerns rested on something cleaner. The attorney coordination Florette had run outside Linwood's knowledge. The discussions surrounding restructuring, the attempts to manage access, the pattern itself. That paper trail didn't prove everything, but it justified preserving records and watching what happened next. "That's the spine," Henderson said. "Everything else builds from it." Mildred had been quiet through most of the meeting. She spoke once to confirm that her documentation was notarized, time-stamped, and held on a secured server outside any system connected to Garfield's employer. Henderson acknowledged that, without expression. He had worked with careful people before. I asked how long before anything moved. Henderson looked at his pad. "The foundation is there," he said. "What we need now is timing." He set his pen down. "If she moves again, if she creates additional documentation, if she gives us one more clear step in the sequence, then we'll know exactly how aggressive we want to be." A faint smile crossed his face. "Good cases are rarely built by rushing. They're built by letting people finish telling you who they are." The meeting lasted another 20 minutes. Evidence preservation, sequencing, document retention, the order in which decisions would be made if additional facts surfaced. I absorbed everything and wrote nothing down. I didn't need to. The architecture was clean, and I had built enough things in my life to hold a structure in my head once I understood its load-bearing points. We left Henderson's office at noon. In the elevator going down, Mildred stood beside me and said nothing. Neither did I. The strategy was prepared, waiting. And somewhere across Atlanta, Florette still believed she was the one controlling the timing. I had dinner at my father's house on a Tuesday evening 3 weeks after the meeting with Henderson. Nothing arranged about it. I had been coming regularly enough that my presence required no explanation. I brought food sometimes, stayed through the evening, left before 9. Florette had absorbed my increased visits into the rhythm of the household, without visible reaction. She was too practiced to show adjustment. But I had been watching her for long enough to know that practiced and unbothered were not the same thing. The tells were small. The kind that only register when you have been paying attention to a person at baseline. She asked Linwood twice in 1 week whether he had spoken to Henderson recently, framed as casual inquiry both times, the kind of question that sounds like nothing unless you know what it's sitting beside. She reorganized the filing cabinet in Linwood's home office one afternoon while I was there, moving folders into a sequence she described as easier to navigate. She stood at the kitchen window for a long time one evening after she thought both of us had moved to the other room. Florette was feeling something she couldn't name, and a woman who can't name what she's feeling tends to move toward the thing she can control. I watched and said nothing. The Tuesday, I was there for dinner. She waited until the table was cleared. Linwood was relaxed. Second cup of coffee, jacket off. The particular ease of a man comfortable in his own home. Florette came back from the kitchen carrying a manila folder. She set it on the table beside him with both hands, the way you set something down that you want to look considered rather than urgent. "I had some things put together," she said. Her voice was warm, unhurried. "Estate restructuring, just a starting framework, nothing final. I know Henderson has been busy, and I didn't want the administrative side to slow things down while you're still getting your strength back." She touched the edge of the folder lightly. "Just look it over when you have a moment. No pressure." Linwood looked at the folder, then at her. His expression carried nothing she could read. He had been practicing that since the Thursday morning he sat in my office. "Thank you, baby," he said. "I'll look it over." She smiled and moved back toward the kitchen. I stayed at the table another 40 minutes. We talked about a project bid coming in from the city, a contractor Linwood wanted my opinion on, the kind of conversation that belonged to every other Tuesday evening we had spent in that house. I did not look at the folder. I did not look at Florette. When I left, I sat in my car at the end of the block and waited. At 9:51, my phone rang. Linwood. "She left a folder," he said. "I know, I was there." "I'm calling Henderson." "Yes, sir." I stayed on the line while he made the second call on speaker, a man entirely at ease with what he was doing, no hesitation in the dialing, no adjustment in his voice when Henderson picked up. He described the folder. Henderson listened without interrupting. When Linwood finished, there was a brief silence on the line. "That's what we needed," Henderson said. I drove home through Atlanta at 10 o'clock with the city moving around me. Lit windows, late traffic, the ordinary machinery of an evening that had just become something else entirely. Florette had spent months preparing those documents. She had brought them to the table because my presence in that house had made her afraid that the window was closing. She had moved not from confidence, but from fear. She moved because she was afraid. And when afraid people move, they leave fingerprints. Henderson called us back to his office on a Friday morning. The discovery documents had come through the civil filing process. Standard procedure. The kind of paperwork that moves quietly through legal channels without announcing what it carries until it lands on a desk and someone opens it. Henderson had reviewed everything before we arrived. He had arranged the pages in a specific order. I noticed that before I sat down, a man who sequences information the way my father sequences a build, knowing that the order in which things are received determines how well they are held. Linwood sat to my left. He had driven himself, which he only does when he wants the solitude of the ride to prepare him. He was dressed the way he dresses when he means to be taken seriously, not formally, just completely. Every detail attended to. The armor of a man who learned early that how you present yourself in a room determines what the room gives back. Henderson set the document in front of Linwood without preamble. The page was a birth record, standard county format, name, date, parents listed, address of record at time of filing. Florette Anita Pruitt, born Atlanta, Georgia, 1969. The name itself was no longer the revelation. We already knew who she had been before she became Florette Calloway. What Henderson had obtained was something different. Official confirmation, tied directly into the discovery record, leaving no room for dispute, explanation, or alternative version of events. Linwood read it the way he had read everything I placed before him in my office, completely, without rushing, giving each word the weight it required. Then he stopped. and he stayed, stopped. The office held the particular silence of a room where something is being understood rather than discussed. I watched his face. I had been watching my father's face my entire life, through contract disputes, through my mother's illness, through the health scare that had started all of this. I knew every register it carried. What moved across it now was something I had no name for. Not grief, exactly. Not guilt. Something older than both. The expression of a man confronting the distance between what he intended and what he caused, and finding that distance wider than he had any way to have known. He had told me once about the Sylvan Road parcel, not the Pruitts, not any family connected to it, just the acquisition itself. His first commercial development, a title gap, a clean legal process, a piece of land that became the foundation of everything Tyndall Commercial would build. He had told the story, the way you tell the story, of a beginning, with the particular warmth of a man describing the moment his life became what it was going to be. He had never known what that beginning cost someone else. That was the weight sitting in the room now, not malice, its absence. The particular devastation of harm that required no villain because it required only the ordinary machinery of legal process and a family whose paperwork wasn't in order. Linwood had done what hundreds of developers did in that era. He had followed the law as it existed, relied on the professionals advising him, and built a company from the opportunity that followed. But somewhere on the other side of that same transaction was a family that experienced the story differently. Linwood set the document down on Henderson's desk. He did not look at me. He looked at Henderson and gave a single nod, the instruction of a man who had finished processing and was ready to move. Henderson placed the signing documents in front of him, one at a time. Linwood worked through them steadily, reading each page fully before signing, the way he has always handled documents that carry consequence. His hand never hesitated. Whatever that birth record had cost him privately, it had not moved him from where he had decided to stand. When the last page was signed, Henderson gathered everything without comment. Linwood sat for a moment with his hands flat on the desk. Then he looked at the birth record one final time. "I remember that property," he said quietly. Neither Henderson nor I spoke. Linwood shook his head once. "I never knew her name." The room fell silent again. A man can live 30 years, believing he understands the story of his own success. Sometimes what arrives late isn't new information. It's the missing person standing inside information you already had. After a long moment, he turned to me. I didn't know. 3 words carrying 30 years. I looked at my father, at the steadiness of him, at the cost of that steadiness, at everything he had built and everything he had unknowingly unmade in the same motion. "I know you didn't." Henderson's assistant called Florette on a Wednesday morning. I was not in the room when the call was made, but I knew the language Henderson had instructed his assistant to use. Routine estate review, administrative matter, Mr. Tyndall would be present. Nothing requiring preparation beyond availability. The kind of call that arrives in a life like Florette's and registers as confirmation rather than alarm. She had been managing this process for months. A meeting at Henderson's office was exactly what she had been moving toward. She arrived at 2 o'clock. I heard her before I saw her. The particular rhythm of heels that belong to a woman who is dressed for a room she believes she is walking into with advantage. She came through the conference room door carrying a folder and the composed expression of someone who had rehearsed being present here so many times that being present here felt like arriving. She saw Linwood first, seated at the far end of the table, jacket on, hands folded. She smiled at him, warm, practiced, the smile of 7 years of a carefully maintained marriage. Then she saw Henderson. Then she saw me. Something moved through her face in the space between one step and the next. Not recognition of danger, not yet. Just the first note of a chord that hadn't resolved. She took her seat across the table, set her folder down. Her phone had been buzzing intermittently for 2 days. I could see it in the way she had positioned her bag, slightly closer than necessary. The unconscious monitoring of a woman waiting for a moment to check something she didn't want to check in front of Linwood. Garfield had been served earlier that week. Whether he had told her everything or not, I didn't know. What I did know was that something had disrupted whatever certainty existed between them. The signs were there. She didn't know that I knew that. She didn't know that I knew anything. Henderson let the room settle for exactly the right number of seconds. Then he opened the folder in front of him, removed a document of approximately 30 pages, and slid it across the conference table to Florette, with the unhurried precision of a man who has done this before and understands that the delivery is part of the message. She looked at the cover page. Her composure held for 4 seconds. I counted them. On the 5th second, something in her face underwent a change that no amount of practice could have prevented. The particular collapse of an expression that has been maintained at considerable cost when the thing it was built to conceal is no longer concealable. She didn't speak immediately. Her hand remained on the first page, not turning it, just resting there. For the first time since she entered the room, she looked uncertain about what came next. She looked at Linwood. He looked back at her the way a man looks when the grief is already behind him. Not cold, not cruel, simply finished. The look of someone who has already moved through the room she is only now entering. I watched her search his face, not for anger, for doubt, for hesitation, for anything she could still use. There was nothing there. She looked at me. I held her gaze without moving, hands folded on the table, back straight. The same stillness I had been practicing since the night I sat at table 9 and watched my life rearrange itself without making a sound. I watched her understand it, not all at once, in sequence, the way understanding arrives when it is unwelcome. That the documents on the table had not come from Henderson's investigation. That Linwood had not assembled this. That every thread that had been pulled, every record that had been traced, every document that had been quietly set aside and built upon, had come from one direction. She had spent months watching Linwood. She had never thought to watch his daughter. Henderson began speaking. Filing dates, named defendants, the civil claims laid out in procedural language that was precise and merciless in its plainness. Halfway through the first page, Florette finally looked down. She turned a page, then another, a small movement, almost mechanical, as though reading could somehow slow what was happening. Her folder sat unopened in front of her. Whatever she had brought to this meeting, she would not be opening it today. She looked at me one more time before Henderson finished his first page. Not confusion this time. Recognition. The kind that arrives when a person finally understands who has been standing across from them all along. She looked at me like she was trying to find where I'd been hiding. I hadn't been hiding. I'd been working. The new letterhead arrived on a Tuesday, a box of 500 sheets, delivered to my office by the print house we have used for 20 years. I opened it the way you open something you have been expecting, but didn't want to rush. Carefully, without ceremony, giving the moment exactly the weight it deserved, and no more. Tyndall Commercial Group, L. Tyndall and N. Tyndall. Linwood had called Henderson the week after the meeting and made it official. No announcement to the staff, no dinner, no speech. He had simply updated the documentation, authorized the new letterhead, and told me on a Thursday afternoon the way he tells me most things that matter, plainly, directly, without theater. I set the top sheet on my desk and looked at it for a moment. Then I put it to work. Garfield's divorce finalized 6 weeks after the civil papers were served. The documentation surrounding the affair, the referral arrangements, and the financial activity connected to the marriage became part of a much larger record than he expected. Several of the claims he attempted to advance did not survive scrutiny. He left the marriage with considerably less than he had planned to leave with. The civil liability moved separately and did not move quietly. The referral fee scheme had run through documented business channels, vendor intake records, holding accounts, a paper trail that extended beyond Nettie Tyndall's divorce, proceeding into the professional conduct of a man who had used his employer's infrastructure to run a private financial operation. Mildred's company opened its own internal review the week after service. Garfield did not retain his position through the conclusion of that review. I learned that part indirectly. One afternoon, a vendor called my office asking for him. When I transferred the call to the number he had used for years, the receptionist informed me he was no longer with the company. Just like that. No title, no office, no access. The rooms had closed. He had used every room my name opened for him. In the end, those rooms became the record that closed every door he had left. Florette's marriage to Linwood ended in the months that followed. The estate restructuring documents she had presented at that Tuesday dinner, the ones Henderson had called exactly what they needed, became a central part of the civil matter. The claims moved forward supported by records, correspondence, timelines, and documents she had created herself. The separate estate attorney she had engaged, the one who had prepared restructuring language without the named client's knowledge or instruction, received a Georgia State Bar complaint within 30 days. Whether the complaint ultimately survived the full disciplinary process would be decided elsewhere, but the filing itself ensured the conduct would be examined. The last time I saw Florette was in a courthouse hallway. Not dramatic, not theatrical. She was seated alone on a bench outside a conference room, reviewing paperwork. No anger, no confrontation. Just a woman sitting beside the consequences of decisions that had taken years to construct. She looked older than I remembered, not because of time, because certainty had left her. We did not speak. Neither of us had anything left to say. Florette had built her operation carefully over many years. What she had not accounted for was that careful and complete are different things, and that the one gap in her coverage had been standing in her kitchen 3 evenings a week, watching her sort a filing cabinet. Linwood's health held. More than held. He came back to the office full-time in the month after the meeting, the way a man returns to work when work has given him a reason to be there that is larger than routine. The health scare that had accelerated Florette's timeline, the thing that made her afraid and made her move before she was ready, had turned out to be the mechanism of her own undoing. She had rushed because she was afraid the window was closing. That fear had produced the folder. The folder had produced the fingerprints. The fingerprints had produced everything else. She had carried the consequences of Sylvan Road for 30 years. Somewhere along the way, that wound found a direction. Years later, it found Linwood Tyndall. By the time she finally moved, the plan she had spent years constructing was no longer as invisible as she believed. I was at my desk by 7 on a Wednesday morning, 3 months after the meeting at Henderson's office. Atlanta light came through the windows the way it does in early autumn, low and amber and specific. The kind of light that makes everything it touches look like it has been there a long time and intends to stay. The letterhead sat in its tray. The files were in order. The phones would start in an hour. I thought about Florette, not with hatred, not with satisfaction, just with the clear-eyed acknowledgement of a woman who had looked at the full shape of something and dealt with it completely. She had carried a wound for 30 years and aimed it at my father's life. I understood the wound. I had no softness for the aim. She spent years building a road toward what my father had made. She forgot that what he made, he had already given to me.